But I tell you something, we're definitely not going to get any dead air moments when my guest, Mr. Derek Shelmerdine, starts talking. Derek, it's been 2 months.
I know. It seems like an eternity.
Welcome back to 107 Rudy FM.
Yeah.
How have you been?
Oh, I've been very well. Very well indeed.
Brilliant. And we got a great subject tonight, the 27 Club.
Absolutely.
Have you actually totted up how many people are authentic members of the 27 Club?
No, it sort of depends where you cast the net, as it were. And I think one of the other things about it is that you see, well, if I start the beginning from my point of view, I think the 27 Club started with Robert Johnson. He died on the 16th of August 1938. And the thing about Robert Johnson is, as well as being like Eric Clapton and every other guitarist's ultimate hero, the guy wrote and released 29 songs across 2 recording sessions. And the guy is an absolute icon. But you do see references to jazz musicians, particularly because they had a habit of dying young. Because a lot of them, I mean, that's really the whole heroin thing
was that
started.
Their lifestyle or the music?
A bit of each, I think. No, I'm only jazz fans.
I'm only joking. I love jazz music.
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
a joke. It's a joke. Come on.
But you do tend to see references like before Robert Johnson died. But I've looked a lot, but I've never managed to find a definitive first reference to whoever coined the expression or the concept of the 27 Club.
Well, I suppose the thing is, if Robert Johnson dies at 27, he is the originator, if you like. But up to that point, he's like, oh, how sad he's died, and he happened to be 27.
Right.
I guess it's not until there are multiples of that you suddenly begin to think, you know, the light. You have a light bulb moment. You think, hang on, they've died, and they've died, and they're all 27. So it then becomes a club, doesn't it? So you've got to probably get to about 4 or 5 of them before anything begins. There's any form of recognition.
Yeah, but the thing about Robert Johnson was he sold. He sold his soul to the devil, famously at the crossroads.
What did he get for it?
Eternal fame, massive fame, and virtuoso-ness, as it were.
Oh, I don't know if it's worth it.
Well, it's really quite interesting. I was looking at this poll of frontmen recently, and of 32 of them, and you know the usual candidates were all there. 4 of them were members of the 27 Club. When you imagine, I don't know how many people across the world die at the age of 27, musicians or otherwise, but it must be a very, very small percentage. But if you look at 4 of 32, that is a significant number. And, I mean, Rudy Lewis, he was poisoned, actually, interestingly enough, Robert Johnson, by a jealous husband. Because he became a local superstar, basically. But, I mean, other people who have died, just in passing, is Rudy Lewis. He died on the 20th of May, 1964. And he was one of the many Drifters lead vocalists. And he died on the eve of recording Under the Boardwalk. He was due into the studio literally the following day. And so Johnny Moore took over the lead vocal for that particular song, because they did have multiple lead vocalists.
I mean, obviously, 27 by anyone's standards is a fairly young age to go. So, are the majority of these people going by very strange means? In other words, you know, drug overdoses, etc. Most of them haven't been murdered, we assume.
Ooh, we got some interesting stories coming there. Yeah, it's quite a thought on a couple of the guys.
But what I mean by that is that are there any of them that have actually died in the sense of natural causes? In other words, nothing could have prevented it. They would have died at 27.
I don't think so.
No,
it's a lot of it is drug overdoses, a lot of suicide, and some. If you look at Rudy Lewis, I mean, there the sources vary quite considerably. Some people think he overdosed. Some people do actually put it down to natural causes, but I would struggle. If you had a congenital heart problem, of course, it might catch you by then, or some nervous problems will catch you by then. But one of the other causes for him was binge eating, like Mama Cass. You know, the urban myth there that she died, not at 27, but she died choking on a ham sandwich, apparently, is one of these rock and roll urban myths that doesn't carry a lot of weight. But talking about murder, I mean, Brian Jones died on the 3rd of July, 1969. And his is a really interesting one. I mean, the death certificate gives it as quotes, drowning, severe liver dysfunction due to fatty degeneration and the ingestion of alcohol and drugs, swimming whilst under the influence of alcohol and drugs, misadventure. But what it was, I mean, he was at his home.
And he was a good
Sussex.
swimmer, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. And a guy called Terry Rawlins wrote this fascinating book called Who Killed Cock Robin? And he talks about the sort of sequence of events. And, I mean, the party started in the afternoon. They were all drinking quite heavily. They were all indulging in a little bit of the various powders, as it were. And about 11:30 in the evening, Brian suggested going for a swim. Now, people were saying to him, "Ooh, Brian, I'm not sure this is the best plan in the world." I mean, long and the short of it, a guy called Frank Thorogood. Now, he was Brian's builder, and he was doing some work at the time, and he was there with his girlfriend, and Brian also had his girlfriend. The three of them went for a swim, and that time of night, it was probably getting cool, and they, one by one, got out. And then somebody, shortly afterwards, there was only Brian left, spotted Brian floating face down in the pool. They got him out. They tried to resuscitate him, but basically it was all over. But when it starts to get really interesting, and this is where anybody who's into conspiracy theories, so you JFK people are really going to love some of these. There's a guy called Tom Keelock, who was the Rolling Stones driver, come roadie, come road manager. And he's reported as saying that he visited Frank Thorogood in hospital when Frank Thorogood was dying. And Frank Thorogood actually admitted that he killed Brian. And in fact, Keelock made a statement to the police in February of '94 recounting the expression. And in part of that quotes, he physically held, Thorogood had said, he physically held Brian Jones under the water. Now, interesting. I mean, also in the Daily Mail...
It didn't go any further.
I mean, he was dead by then, of course, and that was in the days when the police didn't try and investigate dead people. But in the Daily Mail, there was an article on the 30th of August 2009 in which they were saying that the police are examining new evidence. Again, I've never heard anything come of that either, but it just makes you wonder. It just makes you wonder. We'll never know.
But, I mean, did they ever come up with any motive for why he would have done this?
No. I've never seen anything that refers to motives. I mean, interesting.
Very interesting.
I mean, Brian Jones had just been sacked from the... I mean, this can't have any relevance, but I mean, he'd only just been sacked from the Rolling Stones a week or 2 weeks before, because, I mean, he didn't leave of his own accord. One of the problems they had was that Brian had been bussed for drugs, and they were having the devil's own job getting work permits to play in America again. I mean, they hadn't toured America since about '66, I think. And, of course, you got the famous Hyde Park concert a couple of 3 days after Brian Jones's death.
Mick Jagger releases All the Butterflies.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And Mick Taylor made his debut.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one, I think. So maybe while we're contemplating on that, I thought, I mean, one of Brian Jones's favourite artists was Elmore James, and Brian Jones actually called himself Elmo Lewis, I think, when he was playing with one of his early bands.
One of his early bands,
Alexis Corner, when he was playing with Alexis Corner. And I thought one of Elmore James' really popular ones, Dust My Broom, would be a great tribute to Brian.
The blues. Brilliant. That's the way to do it. Dust My Broom and Elmore James, 1952. It was a while ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
But Elmore James didn't die at 27, did he?
No. A lot of these bluesmen lived to ripe old ages.
They did, didn't they? You see them, they've got that wonderful kind of leathery look because of age, but they just look so fantastic, and they just play so well, don't they?
Yeah, you see people like Muddy Waters.
Yeah.
well past retirement age,
Yeah.
singing and playing brilliantly.
Yeah.
What's really fascinating is that really by the end of the 50s, the blues and R&B was very much sidelined. And it was the British and American, but particularly the British beat artists, R&B bands. They've really revitalised the careers of a lot of these blues and R&B guys. That's brilliant. I mean, you get people like Chuck Berry who influenced the Rolling Stones enormously, and then you find them in sort of 1970s tours. Chuck Berry was on the support bill for the Rolling Stones. What comes around goes around, as it were.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. But I mean, one of the sadder stories here, I think, is the Pete Ham of Badfinger.
Yes.
He died on the 24th of April 1975, and he hanged himself in his own garage. We probably ought to do Badfinger one of the months, because, I mean, they've got such a fascinating story. And what a lot of the problem was the fact the band was in dispute with their manager, a guy called Stan Poley. He was handling the band's finances, and apparently, the band wasn't seeing an awful lot.
He was handling it a bit too much by the sounds of it then.
Yeah, exactly. And it is weighing heavily on Ham. And, the depression led to suicide. And the suicide note he left is interesting. It says, quotes, "I will not be allowed to love and trust anybody. This is better. P.S. Stan Poley is a soulless person of dubious parentage. I will take him with me." And that was the suicide note that he left. Now, Stan Poley had taken out, not long before, actually, the sort of late summer of 1974, he'd taken out a $250,000 life insurance on Pete Ham. And the beneficiary was Badfinger Enterprises, Inc., which obviously seriously controlled by him.
Yeah.
But when the insurance company discovered that, because let's say, was a bit sparing with the truth with his dealings with the insurance company, apparently, allegedly. And when it became known that, when the insurance company became aware of the fact that Pete Ham had killed himself, of course it invalidated the insurance policy. It seems to be unknown as to the outcome of that claim. I couldn't find every reference to it said that the outcome, what happened to that money was unknown. And of course, sadly, nearly a decade later, 83, the bassist for the band killed himself as well. He hanged himself from a tree in his garden.
Dear, oh dear.
So not a happy time.
No.
But I mean, that was one of the problems in the 60s and 70s. So many bands were being ripped off by the managers. I can remember Pink Floyd was suing one of their old managers for about £4 million. But it all got too much for Pete Ham. And Jimi Hendrix. I mean, here's another one of the really interesting conspiracy theories. I mean, he died on the 18th of September 1970. And his girlfriend at the time, Monica Daneman, found him unconscious and reputedly called an ambulance. I mean, the general story is Monica Daneman found him unconscious, called an ambulance. Ambulance took him to hospital. Doctors failed to revive him. A death certificate gives the cause as, quotes, inhalation of vomit, barbiturate intoxication, quintobarbital, insufficient evidence of circumstances, open verdict, which is an interesting one. But when you delve into it, I mean, his manager at the time was a guy called Mick Jeffrey. And when Hendrix died, Jeffrey, this is a similar story, Jeffrey was saying that only $20,000 was owing to the Hendrix estate. And, I mean, he had been having some serious success, and bearing in mind that he wrote most of the stuff that he certainly recorded, he would have a lot of royalties going on. But then it starts to really get interesting. If you look at the sort of inconsistencies and even murder claims, Monica Daneman, apparently, she just kept changing her story. The claim that Hendrix, she was with Hendrix in the ambulance, travelled with the ambulance. Now, the paramedics say Hendrix was alone in the flat, so she wasn't there. And they say that she didn't travel in the ambulance. Now, one of the first people on the scene was Eric Burdon, fantastic singer from the Animals, and obviously solo. He says that Monica Daneman travelled with him to the hospital, not in the ambulance. And that there is a thing about, did he commit suicide? Apparently he took one of Monica Daneman's sleeping tablets, or part of one. But a normal dose would be about half a tablet, and apparently he took about 9 of these tablets, but the bottle was still half full. So if he'd wanted to kill himself, chances are that he would have taken more. But when it gets really interesting is that Eric Burdon arrived before the paramedics, and that's when he found the words to the last song Hendrix ever wrote, "The Story of Life," which Eric Burdon then adapted and co-credited on an album shortly afterwards. But a guy called James Tappy Wright, one of these famous roadie type characters, been roadie with just about everybody. He and Rod Weinberg, they wrote a book called Rock Roadie, and in it they claim that Hendrix was murdered by his manager, and the sort of facts surrounding, or the background surrounding that, really is interesting. Hendrix apparently was about to terminate his contract, Jeffrey's contract, and he'd got, oh wow, we just heard this, he had a $1 million insurance contract on Hendrix. Now there's no doubt whatsoever that Mike Jeffrey had mob connections. There's quite a lot of people do in that sort of business, had done. I mean, Frank springs to mind, of course. And Hendrix's new studio, because he'd only recently opened Electric Ladyland in New York some months before he died, and that apparently was in a part of New York that was controlled, had a lot of influence from the mob. And there's also reports that Hendrix had a massive amount of red wine in his lungs, and not a lot in his bloodstream, and apparently that's consistent with waterboarding. Oh. So it's really quite... there is talk of the fact that there was a scarf wrapped around his neck when he was placed in the ambulance. You know, that is claimed as well. The FBI had Hendrix under surveillance, as you can imagine, because Hendrix was really quite a... Well, he wasn't an activist, I wouldn't say, in the anti-war movement, but he was certainly made his point very clear that he wasn't very pro the Vietnam War. But Mike Jeffrey died in a mid-air collision over France in 1973, and Monica Damon committed suicide in 1996.
As Derek gets a drink of water, because he's definitely... I don't know what he's brought with him. You're not thinking of joining the 27 Club yourself, are you, Derek?
I think I'm a little past that birthday, I'm afraid.
I was kind of worried when I got to 26. I thought, well, you know, it wasn't something I was looking forward to.
Well, I find it strange when you do come across the odd person, a musician type, who's killed themselves when they were 28. I thought that was...
Oh, drat, just missed out.
You know, a chance to go down into history. Yeah. But, I mean, that whole thing about Hendrix and the Mike Jeffrey links, you know, you think, oh, who would kill Hendrix? But when you start to delve into some of the stuff that people are unearthing, it's all food for thought.
The trouble is, with something like that, obviously, the main recipient of all this is now dead.
Yes.
So he can say and do nothing.
Yeah.
And so you can almost, I don't know, make it up as you go along, really, can't you, just to put intrigue into it? If you want to.
Because you could. I mean, Hendrix is dead. Mike Jeffrey died in 73, and Monica Daneman committed suicide in 96.
Yeah.
So, you know, the key players are there. But it's people like Eric Burdon that's interesting, because, you know, he's the one who's saying that she travelled with him to that. So I don't think there's any. I think the only person that, foul plays being suggested about was the manager.
Do you know why Eric Burdon turned up at the flat? Was it something he was going to do, or was he called because of what had happened?
Yeah, I think he got a call to say that all wasn't well, because he was a big friend with Hendrix. Of course, the last time he ever appeared on stage was when he jammed with Eric Burdon at Ronnie Scott's club the previous night.
Yeah.
So that was his last ever performance. So, I mean, they were big buddies. So, I mean, there's a lot of inconsistencies around the whole thing. Lots of books have been written about all this. I mean, once again, we'll never know.
I'll tell you something. Now you've finished your Rock and Roll Unravelled, I can see another project coming on. Who Killed Hendrix?
Absolutely.
That should keep you going for the next 20 years.
Absolutely. Oh, there'd be so much to sift through. That would.
Yeah.
We should probably hear a little Hendrix.
We'll do that now. This is Jimi Hendrix, and from 1967, a quick one, this, Fire. Jimi Hendrix, as only Jimi Hendrix can be, I guess.
Oh, absolutely.
You just know his sound, don't you?
Yeah, and that's just such a great example of a rhythm section that are just so together. I mean, Mitch Mitchell is putting so much into that. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed that.
Yeah. And who's the bass player? His name escapes me.
Noel.
Noel Redding, of course, Noel Redding, yeah.
Because he was a guitarist. He switched to bass when he joined the Experience, because when he formed Fat Mattress, because of course they all fell out, Chas Chandler and Noel Redding sort of fell out with Hendrix during the recording of Electric Ladyland,
right.
And he set up his own group, Fat Mattress, and he actually went out with Hendrix when Hendrix was doing his American tour. Fat Mattress would open for them, so he'd sing and play lead guitar in the support band, and then come the interval, he'd be back, change, bring out his bass guitar and play with Experience. I mean, that must have been incredible.
I mean, none of them are around now either, are they? They're all gone.
Right.
But I thought it was a tremendous lineup, absolutely brilliant. How three people can make such fantastic music. It's amazing, isn't it?
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, Keith Moon and Mitch Mitchell are two of my all-time favourite drummers. They're very different. I mean, you can hear Mitch Mitchell, it's very fast, but he's sort of jazz drummer, and the stuff he's doing there is technically very, very competent. Whereas what Keith Moon's doing is very, very fast, very, very impressive, but it's essentially all almost mostly single-stroke stuff. But both awesome drummers.
A lot of energy.
Oh, gosh, yes. Now, somebody else who died, who don't hear a lot about it, is Alan Blindell Wilson, Canned Heat's guitarist and I think founding member. He died in 1970 on the 3rd of September. I mean, just within a very short period of time of when Hendrix died. And he's an interesting one because this is another drug overdose, but some reports that suggest that the drug overdose may have been deliberate, and other reports and other people say that no chance at all, it was accidental. So it's one of those, again, that you never really know. I love Canned Heat. I mean, they were...
On the road again, it's just...
yeah, and they've got an album with
going up
John
the country
Lee Hooker,
and all that lot. Yeah, it's just
Hooker
wonderful.
and Heat.
Yeah.
Absolutely superb. Well, again, one of the famous ones, of course, that died, shuffled off this mortal coil at 27, was Janis Joplin. Died on the 4th of October, 1970. That's a month after Alan Wilson died. And she was, right at the end of finishing what turned out to be her last album, Pearl. And what happened there was that she didn't turn up for a recording session like the day before. The band had been laying down the instrumental track for Buried Alive in the Blues, and she was going to put the vocal track across it on that particular day, but didn't turn up at the studio. So road manager John Cook, he went off to Janis Joplin's hotel, and he found her dead in a room. It's rather sad. And that was a certificate of death. Quotes again, acute heroin, morphine, intoxication, injection of overdose. I mean, that one is, I think, a lot more clear, as it were. So they released the album with Buried Alive in the Blues as an instrumental track, which I thought was a nice touch. And I thought it was a bit, I'm not sure it's ironic, but for it to be called, for that track to actually be Buried Alive in the Blues, I just thought was, there is definitely a finger of fate pointing in some of these directions, possibly. And of course, you can't be talking about 27 Clubs without Jim Morrison. He was one of life's really interesting characters. The Lizard King, frontman with the Doors. When he died, he was still awaiting the outcome of an appeal for one of his transgressions. Many transgressions on stage. And what it was, this particular one, is the Miami gig in March of 1969. And there he was sentenced to, or after being pulled off the stage, basically, lewd and lascivious behaviour he was actually charged with. And the police dragged him off stage. And he was found guilty and given 6 months hard labour and a $500 fine. So his legal people lodged an appeal immediately, and they freed him on a bond of $50,000. So he was waiting to find out whether or not he was going to be going to go to jail. Now, as he was sentenced on the 30th of October 1970, but that was for the March gig, March 69. Now, on the 11th of November 1969, he was arrested in Phoenix on a plane journey. He was on a flight from Los Angeles, and he was going to a Rolling Stones concert. I thought that was a nice touch. And he was arrested in Phoenix when they touched down for being drunk and obnoxious on the plane. But really, the end for the Doors finally came with their last performance in November 1970. Although, I mean, having said that, after this Miami gig, apparently they had a lot of problems then because promoters cancelled a lot of the gigs and tours. Not so much record labels, but DJs in radio stations were, not playing the Doors records anymore. So by the time we get to this last performance in the end of 1970, things were really going from bad to worse. And what he did, apparently he was just getting more and more out of control at the gig, and he smashed a hole through the stage with the mic stand. Absolutely incredible. And they stopped the performance, and the band decided that enough's enough, really, and they stopped touring.
Yeah,
and that really did mark the end, as it were. So what he did, he went off with his girlfriend, Pamela Courson, and they moved to Paris. And we're having living the dream, almost, over in Paris, because he's waiting for his appeal.
Yeah.
And then maybe if the appeal had come through, he'd been successful, he'd probably got back with the band. But, I mean, he was a lad, he was a character, he was a bloke. I mean, his behaviour wouldn't have changed. I mean, you got that famous Ed Sullivan show, Light My Fire, where the producers came down at the rehearsal in the afternoon and said, "Oh, dear me, oh, no, you can't get much higher, no. We can't really be having any drug references on this particular show." So he said, "Yeah, okay, fair enough, I'll just change the lyrics to what you want." Anyway, comes that night performance, of course he doesn't change the lyrics, unlike the Stones a little before that, when they were promoting Let's Spend the Night Together. Yeah. And the same thing happened, "Oh, no, let's spend some time together." And Mick Jagger did, which is probably why they refused to wave on the London Palladium at the end of that Sunday night performance. But he was found dead in the bathtub on the 3rd of July 1971. His girlfriend found him dead in the bathtub. But what's strange about his death is there was no post-mortem. They had a thing, see, he's in Paris, and they had a piece of administration that was titled "Report of the Death of an American Citizen," which is a bit like a death certificate, I suppose. And they put the cause of death as heart failure, and he was buried in Paris. Yeah. So I mean, a bunch of other people like Ron Pigpen Kernan from Grateful Dead died. Dave Alexander from the Stooges, Kurt Cobain. I mean, there's a whole list of people. Amy Winehouse. Yeah.
There must be more.
Oh, there's a whole load.
Keith Moon, obviously, as you mentioned earlier on, and there's got to be, I don't know how many of them.
No, Moon wasn't 27.
Oh, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't that much older than that, but
right.
and that was a tragedy as well. He accidentally took an overdose of pills he was taking to defeat his alcoholism.
Right.
I mean, if that isn't irony, I don't know what is.
Yeah. He might have lived if he'd have drank a bottle of wine. You never know.
Well, that's the irony. What was
it?
designed to save him killed him.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the definition of irony.
Yeah, Derek, as usual, been fantastic as well. The 27 Club. We'll have to. We could, as there's been so many of them. Perhaps we might be able to dish up a few of the kind of later ones in a few months' time. You know,
absolutely.
More the modern ones, and see what we come up with there.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be nice to actually have a list to know how many there actually were.
Yeah.
But Derek will be back with me after the 10 o'clock news, where we'll be doing what happened on this day, or roughly this time of year, over the years. But taking us up to the, hopefully, sort of CD working, news working, you know, I'm working, you know, as long as we're all kind of basically going. But hopefully taking us up to the 9 o'clock news. We've got This Is the Doors, and from 1970, Peace Frog.